Good evening again, and welcome to our next installment of the free professional development workshop series for artists. Hey, Charles.
Hey, I'm back.
Awesome. Everyone,
Stella's done a great job. He's done a great job. Excuse
yeah.
me.
Oh, you're
There
fine.
you are.
So to our attendees, I'm going to do a much more complete introduction of our guest co-presenter tonight, Charles Dixon, in a few moments. But we are so happy and so pleased to be joined by you tonight. And also, as always, with my colleague, Ali M. So I am going to kick us off and start with some information, just a quick hand it over to Ali to share a little bit about the PAiD program in general. We do this always at the top for attendees to know a little bit more about the PAiD program, which stands for Public Artists in Development. This is the workshop series part of it. So Ali will share a bit about the program. We'll preview some of the upcoming workshops, and then we'll dive into our dialogue with Charles tonight. And of course, reserve time at the end of the night for the Q&A. So please think about your questions, get them ready. When you do think of when they are, you can put them at any point. Please look at the bottom of your screen where you see the Q&A tab. And where you see the Q&A tab, that's where you can write your questions. You can submit them at any time while we're in the presentation talking. And then when we get to the Q&A, Ali will help us navigate those questions. But again, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Ali, to share a little bit more about the PAiD program before we dive into tonight's session.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ali, and I'm a project manager at Dyson and Womack. I'm very excited to be here with you, and thank you for joining. So I'll introduce the PAiD program. PAiD is a program of the LA County Department of Arts and Culture, and it's funded by the Mellon Foundation. It's a multi-year initiative that aims to advance the career growth and economic empowerment of underrepresented artists in LA. And one of the main goals of the program is to address the historical barriers that artists face when trying to enter public art, and also deal with the wider challenges that artists encounter throughout their careers. The program is made of multiple components, one being the professional development workshops. And this series of free workshops is designed to provide valuable skills and resources to artists of all backgrounds and career stages who are interested in public art. There are several workshops coming up through October 2nd. And if you want to take a look at all of the workshops, we will drop a link in the chat and you can visit the county's website to take a look. And another component is the Artist Council. The first open call was launched last year, and we're going to be launching the next one for the Artist Council this fall. The council is a group of 8 selected artists commissioned to engage in a series of policy discussions and make recommendations to the county, and they get to create temporary public artworks. The public art apprenticeship is another opportunity for artists that's opening in the fall. And this opportunity is open to artists who have never completed a civic art or public art commission. And the selected artists are going to engage in training and mentorship to complete their first ever public art commission. And finally, the PAiD website is another resource for artists. This website is going to include all of the recordings of the professional development workshops, and there will be other resources relative to the field. And the launch of the website is TBD, but we are going to notify all attendees who are attending when it becomes available.
Thank you so much, Ali. I also just want to add that our first Artist Council's temporary artworks are all opening this month and next month. So check out our Instagram at Dyson Womack and the LA County Instagram and the website at LA County on PAiD to learn more about how and where you can see those artworks. A few have happened, but there's still a lot more to come, and they're really amazing pieces. We're so excited to have these coming alive this month and next month. They'll be up and gone quickly, so check that out and you'll get a chance to see some of the work by the first Artist Council.
As we mentioned, that we have several upcoming workshops, the next being tomorrow night. And if you're joining us tomorrow, this one is called Communicating Designs for Public Art Commissions. And we're going to focus on strategies for effectively communicating your designs after your proposal has been selected for a public art project. And we're going to be joined with the landscape architect firm Kunke Design Initiative and the artist April Banks. And another one that I wanted to highlight is on August 21st, Public Art Opportunities in LA County. Commissioning agencies across LA County are going to join us to directly review upcoming artist opportunities, and they're going to offer resources on how to find these opportunities and how to apply to them. I think this is going to be a great one for anyone trying to get into the field. And the link here shown is the county's website. It'll have all of the workshops and descriptions and speakers. And it'll also take you to the registration page, and I'll add that in the chat for you right now.
Thank you so much, Allie.
Mhm.
And that brings us to tonight and our guest speaker. I love this photo, Charles.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah. I am so honored and so pleased to be able to introduce you tonight. And I want to also say thank you again for joining us, for sharing a bit, not just of your work, which you have shared for many decades for people across Los Angeles, but some insights into your process, how you have navigated this field for the generations that you have, and what you have learned, and the challenges and the difficulties and the celebrations and the joy that you have experienced in that time. So I'm gonna just quickly, my name's Emily Womack, public art consultant and co-founder at Dyson and Womack. You've seen me on some of these sessions, and again, I'm pleased to be here tonight with Charles. And Charles, seen in multiple forms tonight. Charles, we've got you live, we've got you on screen, we've got your work. Charles, I'm going to give a little bit of a bio and share some of your work before we start our conversation. But I just want to say, if I miss things, if there's things you want to highlight, just jump in. Just feel free to share what you like. But Charles is a self-taught artist, a sculptor, and a designer. And as I mentioned, he's worked for over 65 years in this field. Born and raised in South Central Los Angeles. He is an artist who began his first musings with sculpting, whittling at night at 5 years old. And from that beginning, has grown on to have a career that stands out among the icons of Southern California and beyond. He became an official artist at 12 when he sold his first art piece. And after graduating high school, he became a full-time artist. During the time, civil rights and Black Pride movements inspired his initial and his continuing work. He's exhibited internationally with known artists and peers such as John Otterbridge, Noah Purifoy, and Cecil Ferguson, and soon became the Studio Watts Workshop Artist in Residence. Going on, he led the Compton Communicative Arts Academy's sculptural workshop, which later became his home-based studio. Dixon's public artwork span decades and can be found throughout Southern California. He was the first artist commissioned for the Mariposa Metro Green Line station, which you can see one of the pieces on this screen to the right. He also designed custom benches and the walls that you see here, and a pyramid that captures light and sun at certain times of day for that station. He's made works for the California African American Museum, for the Los Angeles Neighborhood Land Trust, for offices of the Empowerment of Congress, the Annenberg Foundation, Friends of Watts Towers. So many pieces. And I encourage you all, if you are not familiar with Charles's work, to take a minute to look into it further. The breadth and range of his, not just materiality, but hand and capacity to think through design is so impressive. He's worked in so many materials. Here you can see wood, metal, acrylic, photography, and is designed in each of these areas with a sense of ingenuity that I think you're going to see on display tonight. He's also, that ingenuity led to HISPUF, which is a high impact styrene plastic urethane foam core, one of my favorites to say. A process developed and mastered by Charles. Using heat and stretching plastic over dimensional objects, he used a heat gun to produce objects 1/10 the weight of fiberglass. I know that some folks might understand some of this and others may not, but that is a real impressive feat in terms of developing a new form, a new strategy, a new way of working, is indicative of Charles's approach to work. The last piece I want to highlight is Charles's monumental piece for Destination Crenshaw called Car Culture. Car Culture is at the Sankofa Park, and I hope I said that right, and is a centerpiece at that park, which is part of Destination Crenshaw and will be opening soon. It is called, as I said, Car Culture. It stands more than 25 feet high and has fiber optic cables woven into the top. Created out of stainless steel, 3 figures stand back to back, forming a tripod with card figures displayed in the collective crown. Car Culture incorporates self-referential elements of cars one might see when lowriders gather in Leimert Park. Atop these car parts rests a fanciful engine, a metaphor of our capacity to be engineers of our own futures. Dixon's contribution is the embodiment of Sankofa, looking back to get what is necessary for our future. And I think that phrase, which I took from the Destination Crenshaw site, so thank you for that language, is so incredibly indicative, not just of you and your work, but of what we're trying to do with these workshops, which is reflect on the past, on the present, on where we are, to imagine a future ahead. And so I wanted to end with that, with this piece in my introduction to Charles, as we now turn to opening up our conversation for tonight. And as we discussed together and earlier, you know, this is part 1 of a 2-part series in this workshop collectively around the idea of budgets and how money and time and resources are impacted. And I think we're going to have a conversation that looks at that, but also looks at the many ways that Charles's experience across so many projects and so many commissioning agencies has impacted how he has built and shaped a career. So we have some questions that we were going to share with you and speak to, and we can start with this one. But I want to just say again that, you know, you take these where you want to go. You share with us what you feel comfortable sharing with us. And we can bring up other images. We can go back to the images and talk about how you'd like to talk about them. But so our first question that we shared, Charles, was, what are some of the key components you consider when budgeting for a public art project? There's so much scale and range and work that you do.
Well, first I want to say thank you for your organization and for your deep consideration for having me on your panel. I'm kind of blown away with the fact that finally something like this is occurring so that other artists can participate without being fearful or being unfamiliar with the process. And it's so greatly needed, and I'm so proud to be a part of what your endeavors are. And so thank you for having me. So that first question is, what I approach and what is usually on the table is, what is your budget? Sometimes people don't understand what it takes to start something like this. And let me go back to kind of like where I fell into doing things as a service to my community in regards to public art, which simply started with doing award assemblies for Brotherhood Crusade, Sons of Watts, doing things like that, giving me those commissions, set me up for doing larger public art commissions like Curtis Junior High School, the Martin Luther King Monument that's there due to Cecil Ferguson's participation in community and then bringing me into that. That was like a major beginning besides. And so by all those little steps led to finding more ways to contribute to my standings as an artist, but also in the public art venue. So the first thing is, how much money do you have? It's not even can you afford me, because you're hungry and you want to find a way to be affordable. And I have found that is that understanding is brought about by the many ways that I can serve through various materials and methodology, and giving them an opportunity to go from something that's, I don't like the word expensive, but something that's long lasting, to something that is affordable to their budget, but yet they can still accomplish what they seek for. And most of these things were done for community needs. And I'm very much into that, putting icons of positivity into the community through my expertise. So yeah, so I asked, how much is your budget again? And then we hashed that out. And I say hash that out because they usually say, that sounds expensive. And then you break that down to why it is what it is, and what it takes to go through those various steps of achieving what they're looking for. You know, material is very important, because if you're carving something from wood, you're gonna, that's usually gonna be an indoor thing, or it has to be handled a certain way externally. And so there's a big time thing in that, because you're carving and you're milling. The other thing is working with clays and molds. Fortunately for me, I was able to learn mold making when I was in high school, where I learned manufacturing. So in doing so, I was able to have a continuous flow into that budget question, because making a mold and professional mold makers is an art unto itself.
Yeah.
So the molds that I have studied, not only when I did it in high school, but I've studied the mold makers in the foundries, and how they approach their mold making techniques, and how I could how I could do the same thing in my own way. I mean, there's a mold maker that goes elaborately with different types of locking systems and things like that, and very time consuming. So usually I don't have that kind of time to project something, but the price that's involved in that is kind of a standard price when you're talking about mold making. So you include that in your budget. If in fact they want something formed from clay, you do a breakdown of the rendering of that clay material. And then you do a breakdown of what kind of mold are you talking about. That has a price to it. Is it a waste mold? Is it a rubber silicone mold? I mean, how many times they want to pull that image off of that mold? I mean, we're talking, and then if they want to do that, there's a price for making a mold that they can pull 1,000 pieces off of it, and they don't need you to do it.
Yeah.
So
Charles, I think what you're saying, I'm writing some notes as you're speaking, and some things that came into my mind that I think are so essential to what you've just shared is educating the commissioners on your process.
Yes.
really getting buy-in on what you're doing can help to build an understanding of cost and materials and then the backside of that is immersing yourself in that materiality and that process and understanding those options, because I think the other key element you shared was about assumptions. And I talk about this a lot with artists of like, when you're working with a fabricator or with a commissioner, when someone hears make a mold, like you just said,
Mhm.
one might hear one thing, one might hear another, one might hear another. And so really hashing down on what those assumptions mean. Like, what is your assumption by a mold? Do you mean do this or do this?
Right.
Can help to bridge some of those gaps where costs aren't seen or costs arise. So I think that I heard in what you were sharing two really key things, which is education of process and materials
Yes.
and clarity on assumptions around what is meant by things.
Yes. And by doing that, you bring about a conversation again about what is affordable to their budget.
Yep.
Because you can go as in far as mold making techniques, you can go into a sand casting mold, which is just strictly making a form, dropping into, putting it into a wet sand environment and creating a one-time pull and then going back and cleaning that up. I mean, that's very simple to do, but you're talking about other things that add to the process that have to be included in the price. So when you're
Yeah.
talking about three-dimensional things, it gets kind of complicated. And I think that is where they're more comfortable. The client is more comfortable sometimes going with industry because industry has said, we got you covered from all bases. And you're going to pay what they would give you would be a price that would be across the board, something that would be average, but it eases them in saying that there's a big corporate structure behind what you're doing and not an individual.
Yeah.
I think it has always been my perception in doing something like that is that I want to put hands on. I think it's very important that that process that an artist, he or she gives to it has some type of hands on. That's where growth process takes place as well. But also the client gets something that's very unique because it becomes like a one of a kind expression.
Yeah.
But now we talk about budget. So, you know, I that particular question,
Yeah.
I could go further into that and talk about how it's broken down. And I think that you have further questions of how that would be broken down.
Let's go to the next question. So the next question we had was, what strategies have you found to ensure your public art project budgets are realistic and comprehensive? And I think starting where you just left off is perfect, because that's a strategy.
Right. And usually the strategy for me has been to get your client to commit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very important for your client to empower you to believe in what you're doing and to be relaxed about that. And so I give my clients, I break it down to there's a design fee, there's an initiation fee where I'm paid initially to start, which is my design. I like to make models of the things that I project because when I start drawing things, it gets so convoluted in various ways you could see it. But if you see it in a three-dimensional manner, a small maquette, it becomes much, much more clearer as to which direction we're going and how you can change that. So that is where we start. And then going through that design fee phase, you're being paid. Then you get to what you call a phase where that's been decided on design. Now you're into actual building this object,
Yeah.
which in that it's called midpoint review. So at midpoint review, you have designed, you have manifest this thing so that your client can come in and view it or look at it to where modifications can be done, because we're talking about public art and we're talking about always going back to who you're serving is very important. But at the same time, you serve yourself. But and let me just say, my breakdown with this is my private, my collaboration, and the job. So collaboration falls into community, public art. The job is when someone says, can you make a Mickey Mouse head? And yeah, there's a price for Mickey Mouse's head. So
Yeah, so pricing things and looking at things in relation to what type of commission it is,
yeah,
if it's a commercial commission versus maybe something you see as more collaborative. What do you mean by private?
private is the thing that I discovered that I had to do. I did a large project once, actually my Metro Rail project, where I was away from my studio for like 2 years.
Wow.
Just, going to El Segundo, and I had an office and all that with my fellow artists. And so after that period of time, when you come back to the studio, it's like you start from scratch. So there's a point where you give so much to this collaboration, you lose touch with your internal self. What's private to you, what motivates you, and of course, you're always being a conduit in the process of everything that you do, but there's this energy of doing something so personal till it doesn't matter who says what about what you do. And then that just a certain kind of accomplishment and joy you get out of being open to that. So yeah, but that midpoint review is where you also expect a payment. Because that payment will enable you to go ahead and finish it to the point of, and you tweak it so that they're satisfied. There may be even another viewing in that midpoint review to say, is that what we're going to do? Is the last look-see before it is actually installed? Now, once it's installed, now we're talking about the walk around, I call it, when they walk around it and they say, because you're waiting on that last check.
Yep.
And they walk around and they say, it's a good job, maybe you could polish that or something like that. And of course, you want to make, it's not only the client, but the client is trying to fulfill something for the community that they serve.
Yeah.
And the artist is a servant of humanity. And so I'm very into the fact of creating these empowerment icons within my community. I mean, I could tell you a time when it didn't work out, but community said, no, Mr. Dixon, we're going to have you finish it, irregardless of what they say. And so my reaction to that is like, you got to make sure you pay my bill if I'm going to go like that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we want you to do it. But, those kinds of things happen rarely, but they do happen. But community in that situation, again, was because of what I offered as a servant of humanity in my community. I was backed up by all those things, and all that worked out. So faith and hope is real.
For sure. And I also hear in what you're saying that guardrails are real and helpful. You
Yeah.
know, like I think in some of the projects you've worked on, they're years long projects.
Yeah.
And I am certain that, protecting some guardrails around thinking about how much funds you might need to carry through the lifespan of a project to make it to that end where you get that final payment. And I also really appreciated what you were saying about at the front of like design fees and artist fees. I think there was a time when, and it's probably still continuing today, where the artist fee becomes the very last part of it that someone gets at the end.
Yeah.
They're holding out for that. And I think what you're describing is a situation where you're thinking more strategically about like, okay, up front, what do I need for design? And how do I get what I need to move that to that next stage, that midpoint stage, and then to that installation stage, but also being smart about, how you bring that client along with you to ensure that you can get those milestones and we've all had the bad experiences along with the good ones.
Yes, we have. And there's one thing that I omitted in the breakdown, and that I have recently learned in my creative endeavors. Taxes
Yes.
have to be included in your breakdown of what you're proposing to be paid in that, so that that is taken care of
Yes.
when you complete your project. And in the beginnings, I mean, I'm talking about in the beginnings, like I call it the Wild Wild West of public art. Those weren't necessarily the things that you thought about. Because you were already in poverty stricken, in a sense. I don't believe in starving artists. I think that we whatever we want to do and however we want to do it, it's always provided for. I'm a believer in divine order. And so, but I've learned that you have to consider that factor, that business factor. So it behooves an artist to, if you're getting large sums of money, to go to a planner that can give you insight on how that money's broken down and who's got to get your money, because you got to pay the government. And the government, if you get a large sum of money, how do you break that down in like, oh, this is materials. I didn't go to the, I didn't spend this at the club, I didn't buy a car, and stuff like that. But if you did buy a car, it was for the project, right? So you gotta balance all that stuff out.
Yeah.
And so I've learned somewhat recently that these are things you have to consider, and how you get your funds are very important. You have to follow that tax breakdown so that you don't get a large sum of money too soon before the tax things break, how do you say it, for the period of paying your taxes or doing your taxes. It's broken down in such a way where it could be a trap. You don't want to get into that trap.
Yeah, so thinking about the tax year, and I think the main thing you just shared there is talk to your professional if you can, because the income that you can make in a year can really be different for artists, and that can have huge impacts, profound impacts on planning. So that's huge to bring up, and I would also add in those line items that maybe weren't as necessary in the past, but are definitely necessary now beyond taxes is also insurance. And artists do, and on large public artworks are required to carry insurance many times now. And that's a line item worth getting advice and support on when you're budgeting a project at the beginning as well.
Absolutely. So some projects actually not only require it, they demand it, that you can't sign the contract unless you pay up. So, it's written in the contract to take care of that first. And there are large sums of money in, like I say, what used to cost generally pennies is now a large amount of money that you have to take out of your contract for insurance.
Yep. Trying to think of some of the other things that come up in that field, but I think taxes and insurance are surely some of the bigger ones. Big
Mm.
ones, materials. Let's see what we said next. Oh, well, kind of what we were just talking about. In your experience, what unexpected challenges or expenses in managing budgets have you seen, and how has that impacted your projects and your approaches? And, I think we've all got COVID stories of prices changing and materials changing and that kind of thing. But also projects can last longer than you think that they're going to. Which has real world impacts on budgets. And I'm
Yes.
curious what you've seen in over the years, if things have changed in terms of compensation for projects as they go on, or other things you might have experienced as challenges to managing budgets.
That's a real good question. I'll go back again to my Metro beginnings, where our project was called More Bang for the Buck.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And they definitely got more bang. What was 1% then compared to now? Just rough idea of a budget that was 140,000 at 1%.
Yeah.
Now it's like 600,000.
Mm.
So if I would have gotten that job then, I would have more stuff. But so the beginnings, I've been in the beginnings of many projects and watched things grow.
Mm.
And being first is not always the best place to be sometimes.
Yeah.
You're forging ground. And it's always been my intention to forge a ground so that other artists can benefit from my experience. And so I've always brought in other artists so they could see local artists and artists that wanted to work with me during a public art project, so they could have the breakdown of how those things work.
Mm.
Michael Massenberg is one of those people. And oh my God, he has tremendously blown up after he worked with me on my Metro Rail project.
Mm-hmm.
He ended up actually installing some things from Metro Rail in the Imperial Station. He did something that they never do ever again, which is drilling holes in concrete pillars. So anyway, he was a first.
Yep.
Lad.
I think that's a good point, though, of like being first in one way, but also it becomes that thing of the peer-to-peer learning and being able to be really open and transparent about the challenges and the things that you're seeing, and how that community can really build knowledge and can build a resource for artists. And it sounds like that's been something that's been a part of your career as well, is a community of artists.
Yeah. And just to experience some of the breakdowns in those budget and in projects, is that sometimes you don't realize that the people that hire you are late.
Mm-hmm.
You become the fall guy in
Mm-hmm.
that process.
Mm-hmm.
I've been through that too.
Yeah.
I recall a project where, I'm not going to name names, but I recall a project where I had sworn off of public art, period, because I had been kind of like pushed around, got the job done. But someone came to me and said, Mr. Dixon, we want you to do it because we just believe in your capabilities. And I'm sitting in my ass, and I said to myself, you always have these conversations with yourself before, when you say, I'm not going to do it. And then someone comes to you and they go, and they match all the things that you say, that you've said to yourself, unless they say this and unless they say that, I'm not going to be a part of it. Someone came to me and gave me all the answers I wanted to hear. And I was like, wow. And then I took the job and the person quit after a month. So the next person I was dealing with had no idea of what they were doing. And it ends up that they set me up to fail because they were more interested in the logos on the blueprints instead of what I was doing. So, and unfortunately, those people are backed up by their offices, because they're the ones that's late, and so everyone's protecting their own butt, so to speak. But artists get pulled into those kinds of things, and some people want it quick and fast without realizing that artists can be sued, but not able to show up. I have been blessed in being able to show up for all my projects, irregardless of what the circumstances were. I mean, I've done some things that I just hadn't. I reached the point where I had no idea how is that was going to work out. I just kept working and doing what I knew I could do best and holding a positive attitude about that. And it was so amazing to see divine order in effect when someone would say that they respect it. They would say, like, why are you doing this to Mr. Dixon? You're trying to get blood from a rock. What you need to do is reach into your purse with your notebook and start from scratch and give him a realistic timeline so that you can get what you want, but you don't hurt this person because you're late, So,
yeah. Well, and I think what you're talking about there is also advocates and
yes.
support and community as part
Yes.
of your history and your trajectory and the role that advocates and support and community have played.
Yes.
And I think the other thing that you're talking about is something that has come up quite a bit in many of our sessions as well, which is just the burden of artists to kind of justify sometimes not just their existence and their role, but the value of their work.
Yes.
And how, I think that's changing, and I think we have more understanding of the value of work, but I definitely think there's still more room to go.
I agree.
For sure. And so it's interesting to hear, the role that, perhaps others standing up for you and saying, hey, I'm advocating for this person and their the importance of their work can be a really important piece because it's hard to be your own best advocate sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But there's, I think the deciding factor in that, well, what has happened, let me be more positive about now, like you say, things have changed. And I have experienced that with my current commission with Destination Gritjaw.
Yeah.
The advocate has been the artists in the community that we respect and that we see as our peers. And so, but they are able to handle administrative breakdown as well as be administrators in that process.
Yeah.
And so, very savvy people, but also very creative people with their creative self. And let me just say, I have learned within this public art process is that all of us are artists and all of us have a creative self. And so it's important that they know that I respect them in their artistic endeavor too, because I'm not a mathematic person and I don't write and I don't read a lot either. But I do understand humanity and how we all need to respect each other in such a way that our physical, spiritual needs are met, because that's what we are. So, yeah. So in any case, that's
no, and also I think that speaks to another point that we've also talked about before in some of these workshops, which is not forcing, like, if one has the privilege to think about, accepting or not accepting a commission,
Mhm.
but within that space, the ability to really look at the agency you would be partnering with and evaluate their alignment with your goals and values, and how it is truly a partnership, and
That's
how understanding like where you feel valued and trusted, and where you align with someone's approach and vision can make everything all the way down to budgets and money so
right.
much more uh, manageable than when you're kind of starting out at a point where there's maybe perhaps more misalignment.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we have entered into the time of manufacturing art,
Yeah, yeah.
which is good. I don't, I'm not afraid of someone manufacturing something for me because I could learn from how they do it.
Hmm.
I could also be a part of them of working with them on manufacturing it. So it
Yeah,
just gives me a greater understanding of what I want to do on my private level. So even with three-dimensional printing, it's what they're doing. What's a lot going on right now. But even with that, I would still enjoy learning how to work the 3D printer and exploring new possibilities of how that can serve me with my private work again.
yeah.
So there's, but at the same time, I think that um, it seems to be there are trends all the time, but I think that what happens with trends is that it's like a series that plays too long and you go like, yeah, it's kind of getting thin, and then the public says, well, what that I don't see the fingerprint in that work.
Yep.
And people, because that's who we serve humanity, and so those people eventually say, well, what did the artist really do,
Hmm.
besides draw a sketch and then just say, go at it. Um, but there are artists that have made millions off of just saying it's new.
Yeah, well, I'm also, that brought up another thing I was thinking about, which you just shared, which is the translation, your experience of like, when you control the process, when you're making it, the material, the hours it's going to take you to do something.
Right.
But it's different when you work with a fabricator and you're reliant on them to kind of help explain their costs, their fees. And, I wonder how you found in places when you maybe have subbed out work,
Mm.
uh, understanding how you fit that into a budget. Do you get all of your costs? And if I'm going too far, just tell me, but do you get your costs before you price it out? Do you talk to fabricators? Have you um how have you worked with other folks and had to incorporate their fees into your budgets? And I know I'm just curious about that, because when you go to
Well,
be sold to a group, it's different.
yes. Well, it just so happens that I've been working on Destination Grinshaw for 6 years,
Wow.
to the point that, I mean, after going through budgets and contracts and drawings and finally executing a form, getting that, using part of the budget to have that form, which is that sculpture produced in a material, and then having the foundry go under. So now, after finding out that certain design specifications and things like that were not put in the right place on your blueprint.
Mm.
So something that has been cast and done has to be filleted and reconstructed, which never was in the budget in the
Nope.
first place. Plus, you don't do that kind of fabrication. So you're going to have to go, and if it's fabricated, it has to be certified every step of the way because it's going in a public place. And in a case of what we're doing with Destination Crenshaw, all my figures had to be filleted and reconstructed internally
Mm.
by a fabricator that specified, I mean, his speciality is stainless steel.
Mm.
This gentleman is a master at this. I mean, he lives to work with this material. And the challenges that he faced fabricating the next step, because I had to move everything from from that location, find a foundry within 30 days.
Wow.
And so yeah, I mean, it took longer to finally get everything to fall into place. But I'm saying with this fabricator and new designer and new management, and everything started all over again, to the extent that contracts had to be amended and things like that step in. But again, the divine order is always in effect, where the person that is working on my project, Oscar is his name. He is a master at what he does.
Yeah.
And so my respect for him is very high. So when it comes down to, but I designed the figures. So that's my fingerprint.
Yeah.
So everything after that, and my request, I mean, talking to engineers and all this stuff, my request in regards to the cars, now we're working with another fabricator that works on the computer and digitizes all the bins, all the measurements according to the engineer, and how the specifications of weight. I mean, we're talking, and where the fiber optic cables are going to go. And it's so daunting. It's like I've done a lot of stuff with making statues, but this is on a whole nother level.
Yeah.
And this is actually where I wanted to be. So I'm not, I'm not saying I'm not happy. I'm thrilled that the destination organization has stood fast in their belief of who I am and what I could do, and also the way I think.
Yeah.
So, and also the respect that I could put into my project was given back to me by my fabricator, because I had the capabilities to do it, but I'm not a certified welder in that extent with stainless steel. So that's, that's some serious stuff. Because before you make, I mean, you can go zit, 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 make a couple of inch welds, and the guy comes in, he says, I didn't certify that. You got to cut all that stuff loose. So I experienced that too with a couple other projects where we're going to pour concrete, and the inspector didn't see that pour. And he says, hey, I didn't certify that. He says, I mean, I had to really talk because someone had poured the concrete without my permission, and it wasn't certified. And so the guy said, and we're talking about 3 or 4 feet of concrete, and had to, he could have said, you have to dig all that out,
Yeah.
but he had mercy. And we got by that time. But
I mean, I think what you are highlighting is the importance of dialogue, because what, this question underlies is what unexpected expenses or challenges
yes.
when is there not unexpected challenges and expenses?
And you always put 20% in there, but and I've known and no matter what public art project you work on, there's always that extra something that pops up.
Contingency.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think also another word I'd like to share in that, because I think you expressed it maybe without using exactly that word, is change order.
Yeah. Oh, change order. That's a good way of saying it.
Yeah. The time and place for change order, when designs change, when new requirements come to light.
Yes.
You don't have engineering when you sign a contract. That's part of what you're doing. And so engineering might come back and say, hey, you now have to do this a totally different way. So I think being aware of when specific changes come up, that change order piece. And then, talking about fabricators, there's something else that a few years ago, I learned another phrase that I'm going to share, which is a no cost option. And it's a phrase that I learned working with fabricators where, let's say something comes up and you need to make a change to address an engineering question or something like that. And you don't have a project partner that either has the funds or is capable of doing an actual change order. One of the things I've learned to ask with fabricators is there a no cost option? It may mean changing your design. It may mean, reducing a scale or changing a material. But a lot of fabricators can work with you to find an option that'll address the need that doesn't necessarily mean a cost has to be incurred. And it's not always the case, but I think it's a great tool to have in your pocket to say, hey, is there a no cost option to address this?
I have to use that in the future because that's really good. I haven't heard it that way. Yeah, a no cost option. Yeah, I think we've been through some of those.
Yeah. And maybe that no cost option doesn't always have to be borne by the artist, but that brings us to our last question for tonight. I think underlying a lot of this is this question of, how does the artist actually get paid? And we've talked a lot about how materials cost and what we've talked about what, outside consultants and taxes and insurance. But all of that aside, you've got a studio you might need to pay for, rent you might need to pay for, obviously. And I'm just curious, you've worked in this field for a really long time. And part of what we're looking at in this project is where we are now and where we want to go. And looking back at the history is helpful for that too. And I'm curious about, what changes you may have seen in your long history of the value of the artist fee, of the protection around it or not, of the amount of, what we expect to be, 10%, 5%, things that 20%, 25%, if you've seen changes in that dialogue and in the way that that's spoken about and held or not over your experience.
Yes, my experience have had a lot of that. I mean, there's again, sometimes expectations of how it's done, things are left out in engineering by no fault of the artist, but they have to be changed. And so the artist fee should not be affected by that. Yeah. There should be a contingency fund that would take care of the artist, take care of the project, because the artist is getting paid and should get paid throughout the project. Like you say, you have to pay for the studio, or she has to pay for the studio. There's a lifestyle thing in there. So that, and then amendments in your contract, because the timeline, the pandemic threw off a lot of stuff in relationship to timelines. So we're talking about even storage of materials and things like that you had purchased that had to go on a certain progression of development of the project. So you have to store that. So now you're paying storage fees. They weren't in your budget to do that. But actually in this recent case, because of that, they actually offered extension to pay for storage and things like this. This project has been very, very lucrative for me and very positive, I have to say. The Destination Crenshaw project. The ones before that, I've had very good feedback and things like that. But there's always these deadlines that don't always meet with realistic performance levels. So, and you don't want to produce anything that's going to fall over, or God forbid, you don't want to do anything that's going to be, because people are going to look at what you do as a public art. I usually, when I finish a piece, I walk away. I let the public know it belongs to them. I give them the best that I can give, but I walk away. I'm not egotistically attached to that. but I think the community should understand that they have been given a gift from a person that has been given a gift. And so it should be taken care of with respect.
Hmm.
Even though we sign clauses now that what we do as public artists can be moved, you know, to the discretion of the city or whoever's in control of those things. Nevertheless, it's public art. And so you put your name on it, but it's important to understand it belongs to the public.
Yeah. Well, Charles, thank you for providing that insight and background into your work and the things that you have been making and the experiences that you have had through making them. I really appreciate this conversation and this dialogue and your openness to kind of sharing your experiences. It is an absolute gift to be able to learn from others and to hear how we have different people navigate the space of public art. And so I just again want to say thank you for being open to sharing that. Before we jump into the questions, and we have quite a few, so we're going to get into them quickly.
Quite a few.
Quite a few, quite a few. We'll see, we'll navigate them together.
No problem.
I just wanted to offer if there's anything else you wanted to say before we go to questions.
Well, I just want to say I congratulate your organization, and you two have been very you know, very nice welcoming me to participate in your project. And it's something that I felt like it's time. It's an opportunity that other artists now can understand, get an opportunity to get their foot in that door. And there's a lot of artists that just would not participate in public art because it was just too, it had too many snags in it and too much time consuming to try to understand the politics of it and the step-by-step process. And, you know, a lot of my friends have felt that way about it. Although I have, you know, I asked them to participate with me in learning some of those things, there's still a lot of denying, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
But this program that you're projecting is very positive, very important to the future of public art. And I commend you on that.
We agree. It has been a pleasure to work on this project for the LA County Arts and Culture, and it is amazing that they had the foresight to put that together and to bring this out as a public program, and for the Mellon Foundation to fund it.
Yes.
Amazing. I'm going to invite one of our LA County folks to also join us in the Q&A. We invite them to join us in the Q&A because it's super helpful to have their specific perspective about the commissioning as it works with the county. So this is Brianna McGillivray, who I also like to add is the person who actually wrote the initial grant for the PAiD program. So
congratulations.
Yeah. So knows everything about PAiD, but also a lot about how the county operates and works with artists. So it's been very helpful having that direct experience in this Q&A as we go through the questions as they might relate to county projects. And how the county specifically works with artists. So I think between Charles and Allie and Brianna and I we'll try to field these questions and see how we get on. So
Right.
Allie, I'll kick it over to you to start reading them out and helping us to navigate this.
Okay. I'm going to start from the bottom this time.
Great.
Do you ever apply for calls with fixed budgets? And if so, how do you handle your desire to make budget adjustments?
Make my desire to make budget adjustments, like when I say, for instance, I could probably use another material and make it more affordable for them to participate in the project. I mean, that's usually what I give them a variety of possibilities of materials so that they can accommodate that for their budgets. And then I break those costs down so that if they can't afford to go high, they can go medium or low. I mean, sometimes you just got to go concrete, or you got to go hydrocal or, whatever. Wood is a very speciality because you're talking about one of a kind type of thing, unless you mill it. Now they have computers that can mill, but nevertheless, there's a cost factor in that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if I can add on that, just,
Yeah.
From an agency perspective, at least speaking for the county Civic Art Division, we expect there to be some modifications to the budget as artists go along, because it is so difficult at the early stages to project every single thing. And so we have, regular check-ins with the artists throughout the life cycle of a project. And so when initial design is approved, that comes with an approval of the budget that the artist has put together. And then as certain milestones are made throughout the process, the project manager will regularly check in with the artist to say, like, are there any alterations that you foresee or that you'd like to make to the specific line items of the budget? And so that's an opportunity for the artist to say, actually, I thought that installation was going to cost this much, but actually it's going to cost this much. I might need to take out from my contingency a little bit, or I need to spend a little bit less or a little bit more on the community engagement part of the program or on fabrication. So there are opportunities for adjustments. So artists, at least with the Civic Art Division, shouldn't be scared about that happening.
Right.
Thank you. Speaking about contingencies, how can an artist plan for contingencies? Yeah.
Well, depending upon what material that artist is going to be working with, you pretty much set up your contingencies through knowing how to address your material and your timeline. Process is the key to moving forward with any of those things. You just got to know what you're dealing with, the specifications of size of material, like I say, is the key factor. And then again, the discussion about adding to the budget, having an amendment to the contract, should be open to opinion about if this happens, are you prepared? And normally I don't like to bring that up because that causes the client to go like, well, I don't know. It's kind of get more fearful, and you're already, my experience has been, if you're not empowered completely, you do have that fearful element involved. So.
Yeah. I think that underlines again that piece of like, there's no substitute for knowing the process and knowing your materials. And just a little shameless plug is we are going to do some workshops later on in the process about materiality, about fabrication. And I think Charles is an amazing advocate for understanding what you're working with, because so much of those costs come out of that. But Brianna, I'm curious what you think about like holding, what level of contingency to hold, what standard, if there's like, it used to be in my mind 20% a lot of the times, but I don't know. I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, I would say, I think part of the question, is that you really can't anticipate, in these projects that take 1 and 3 years to complete or more. 6 years is what, Charles was saying with Destination Crenshaw. So I think, it's just always wise when you're developing a budget to put in your own contingency. I think 10% is like really healthy and standard. you know, for a long time, our division was always requiring that of any budget that an artist would put together for a proposal. We specify that one of the items needs to be 10% for contingency. To make it a little bit, you know, easier on artists, we're kind of working with the idea of we're just withholding a certain amount from the overall project budget. So we just manage contingency exclusively ourselves. So it's just much cleaner and easier for artists to, you know, work through a budget. But if you're working, you know, depending on who you're working with, what kind of scale the project is, I think it's just always wise to just give yourself 10% of the total project budget. It's just there in case something goes wrong that you can feel comfortable pulling from, if need be. But, you know, you could also make it as high as 20%.
I was going to say, in the past, it's been 20%.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've sort of in the past we've required artists to manage 10% contingency risk, and we take an additional 10%, but I think now we're just taking it on all ourselves. But yes, 20% is like really, I think, a responsible figure.
Yeah.
Kind of in the same, similar to that question, they're asking, how do you deal with contingencies when fabricators and installers keep increasing their price due to inflation? And meanwhile, the artist has to stick to their budget and the project is taking like longer, maybe over 2 to 3 years. What are some tips for them?
Well, usually, when the project runs over time, there's usually, you reach a point where you have to make an amendment in your contract, because it's no longer realistic for the artist to stay in a situation where he or she is not being paid to take care of their needs. Now you're talking about someone that's working in panic and trying to make something work and out of their pocket, and they got nothing in their pocket to make it work. So amendment in a contract can compensate for that kind of thing happening, gives the artist time, and also gives the project more feasibility to be completed in a more of a timely manner, even though it is falling back. It gives great respect to the creative person that's doing the work as well.
I think that also ties in so much to the contract session that we've had and the work on that front, because the ability to ask for change orders or the process of how a change order or a contract amendment might come into play. One of the best things one can do is up front at the start of the project is understand it's in a lot of contracts, it outlines the process for how an amendment would be made or the process for how a change order could be requested. So it's really great to ask those questions at the outset. And I think sometimes we think we don't need to do that then, there's no problems, there's no issues. But the worst time to have to think about that is once the problem and issue arises. So I think looking at that at the start and making sure that one, if there is a pathway of how that's dealt with, so that you know and you're familiar with it. And so when that does come up and there's the anxiety and the stress and the this and the that, you've at least already pre-thought through, okay, maybe I need to notify them this way, or I need to, you know, this is the process we have set out. And if there isn't a process for that in the contract, it's really great to ask the agency what the process is.
Well, you know, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, well, currently, that whole consciousness has been expanded to do exactly that in the contracts up to date. There is a contingency plan in the contract so that they know that if something falls behind, there's additional funds, or you know, we can have another conversation about what can happen to make it better, to fulfill it. But it's you know, like I say, when I started doing public art, it was like shoot from the hip. And so there were things that happened that we did where like we're just breaking ground and we're just trying to see. But over a period of time, those fail-safes had to be put into contracts, because you were putting yourself into harm's way if you didn't.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me go back. Someone is asking, what is a basic budget breakdown?
A basic budget breakdown.
The line, I think they're talking about the line items that one.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
yeah,
if you'd
go ahead.
like, I can share an example of what the county, do you
Yeah.
for that? Okay. Let me. Sorry.
You're fine.
I pulled this up because I thought maybe this would be useful.
Mhm.
Are you allowing me to share, replace current share?
Yep.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. So keep in mind, this is just an outline.
Oh.
But for civic art, you know, we always designate 20% right up front for the artist design fee of the total budget. A new item that we're sort of seeing, you know, more and more, it's important for emerging artists to get project management support. So we've added in, you know, 15% to keep in mind if you do want to hire somebody to kind of help you through the process. General expenses, we lump at about 10%. And then the artwork deliverables, which includes everything from community engagement, fabrication materials, and installation, is 55%. So this is just a guideline. This is something that we provide artists. You know, if they're struggling to put together a budget, they've never done it, they have no idea, or even experienced artists just coming into civic art, kind of what do our commissions look like and what are our expectations. So this is, you know, if there's more specific comments or questions about this, I can try to do my best to answer, but I don't know, Charles, if you have any thoughts on
Well,
this.
I think it's a good guy. It's a good beginning. I never had one of those when I started. You know, I broke mine down. I didn't have a project manager. I was the project manager. So I was taking that role on, and that percentage, that's a correct percentage. So I like that breakdown. It's a good start. It's a good start to say, for someone that hasn't done it, to be able to have something like that in front of them.
Mhm.
Yeah. And, you know, all of these things are just guidelines. You know, we don't know for certain how much your auto and liability insurance would cost, because it is based on, you know, the amount of risk that the insurance providers are anticipating and what the project budget is. You know, you might not need to travel for your project, but this is kind of like where you would consider putting that sort of expense. But they are hard to calculate, but this is just
Right.
starting.
And insurance costs has really soared in public art.
Yeah.
I mean, what was 1 million is now 10 million or something like that. It's really off the hook, you know, to say you stub your toe. It's insane. I'm sorry.
Well, we know this actually came up in one of our workshops last week. We were talking about insurance quite a bit, so, and all the problems with California. You know, and then the permit and inspector fees, this, you know, amounts to about 4%, but that's not always the case. Not all projects require that you would, you know, need to pull a permit from building and safety. So, you know, some of these are just certainly hypotheticals, but anything, I think things like this are helpful just as you're kind of going about the process of you know, putting together a design proposal. What are the kind of considerations that you need to put into your budget? Because a lot of times artists just don't, you know, they maybe didn't even think about site preparation as a need, or storage, as it's come up in some of the questions.
Right. And that's, you hear like, well, I've done foundations and everything, but that has the site preparation has come up quite a bit from my past. Now it's standard equipment because you're talking about a lot of things are muralists, and you're prepping and you're fixing structures so that you can work on high, scaffolding, etc. And then insurance, big time with those things. So yeah, I think that's, I honestly, I've never seen a breakdown like that. It's very informative for a beginner. And just for me, I'll get a copy of that.
Yeah, we'll be sure to share with everyone later. And you can let us know too, Charles, if you think of something later that's maybe not on here, that's glaring and missing, that's helpful for us.
Yeah, sure.
I love
Love
it.
to.
Validated by the expert.
And there again, I'm a maker. I even the role of artist, I'm a maker. I love to make anything and everything. It's difficult to tie me down to do any particular one idea. I like, because I see all my materials merging into one concept, one idea. That's my goal from the very beginning. So I have a great need to do that. So the whole thing of producing public art takes on some particular roles that need to be defined by people that understand how to write that down, how to break it down in committee, and how to having someone that is a mediator of a sorts to break it down to a person like myself that says, well, they don't understand this, but they understand this part of you. And this is what's standard. And so now we have a buffer. So having a breakdown, a concept like that already down, you can manage it with another creative individual that understands process, but understands how to work in the contractual and business level of what you're doing, but still has the ear to hear the creative process. Because I get real technical about making stuff, like you guys get real technical about contracts. So you get a 25-page contract and all you hear is the authority. You need some help.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And I think, the more I've been sort of in this realm, the way I've been able to kind of appreciate and understand not only a good contract, but also a good budget, is that you can think of it as sort of like a roadmap for where you're going, like you're designing something, but to actualize it out of just the thought imagination side and to make it happen, a good budget is gonna, kind of provide the how-to, the detailed sort of map to get to that end. And so, the better your budget is, the easier the process is going to be for you in your artistic process of getting.
Absolutely. Yeah, when I did Metro Rail, I keep bringing up Metro Rail because when they say more bang for the buck, anything that had to build the station, we designed and engineered it. So we had to understand materials, how it was going to be engineered. We had to understand the cost factor in producing it. We went to other fabricators and they gave us prices. And there were some people that just said, hey, I just want to be a part of it. I'll give you a break. So this money factor was critical. I mean, when you say more bang for the buck, I was able to do things that would cost $100,000 for $25,000, only because I understood the materials and I could almost manufacture it myself. So, I mean, I was getting paid, but I wasn't getting paid. But I was performing what needed to be done to make this thing uniquely my expression. Back then, we engineered and everything on those stations, we designed those things with the supervision of bridge builders and architects. And the architects didn't necessarily like that because we were taking their job in a sense. Our designs were over their designs. And so very unique thing that I went through because people came from all over the United States, certain people every Wednesday to see what all the red ties came over to see what we were doing and looking over our shoulders. I was fortunate enough to have because I let everyone pick their station, and then the very last station, whatever was left, I got it. And I love that. I picked a station that I could manage. And so I didn't have the big budgets that all the other cats did, but nevertheless, I was very capable of handling those budgets, and I could give more bang for the buck because I just love to make things. And artists have a tendency just to love to make things, and they fall into these financial holes where their budget isn't big enough to really do it. And so what you've given the percentage there is a very good start. But I think with anyone that is going to fabricate or do anything in public art, they really need to study their materials. They need to study who's manufacturing what, and they need at least 3 opinions to do that. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you. Brianna, someone is asking if that document will become available.
Yeah, I think we can share that out. You all
Okay.
afterwards.
You can send that to my email too,
I
right?
will.
This is a question for the county and Charles. In your experience, is it better to give the client an itemized budget or an all-inclusive budget?
Itemized budget. I mean, you really need to break down what you're doing, and you need to break it down in months or weeks or whatever it takes to accomplish. Because you have a startup, you have a midpoint review, and I always stick to that midpoint review, and then you have a completion or an installation fee where you can install it, and your installation fee is part of that installation. And then there's a walk around, and that walk around is when everyone agrees that you've done a great job and it's nice, and we'll give you your check in so many days, your final check. So, and then there are things that are required with that. So, yeah, you need to have a breakdown in cost, fees, and things like that as you go, because that's actually going to serve you in the ultimate end. Because as you develop it, you want to be getting paid. And if you have just a big number, you still have to break that down, because they're going to want to know what they're buying, and how much are they buying, and how much are you giving yourself out of your budget. Yeah. So yeah, I have never given anyone just a big fee. And as a matter of fact, I've given them like 3 possibilities of how it can be done.
I see you shaking your head in agreement, Brianna.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about, for the county, we as you all have maybe seen from previous selection processes, like whenever we put out a call for artists, there's always a stated budget up front. So it's not like you're proposing to make something and then you're giving a budget, or I could do it at this scale or this for this dollar. So there's always a set budget. And then as part of the selection process, we ask that artists not only submit, design proposal, but also a budget with that of how they're going to produce that work. And so it's very important that you would create an itemized budget based on kind of these, big categories of like, how much is fabrication going to cost? How much is installation, your artist fee, all these other categories that I showed on the template, because it gets into you know, showing your professional readiness to complete the project.
Mhm.
If you just say like, yeah, I can do this for 350,000, you know, that doesn't show like the selection panel or the client that you have necessarily the capability to do it if you don't understand like how much things are going to cost, because within those breakdowns, it shows that you have, you know, either existing experience with those materials and you know how much they're going to cost, or you've done your research, you know, as Charles was saying, getting quotes from multiple, you know, maybe fabricators or installers to find the best price
Right,
point for that deliverable. So
right.
Thank you. Next question, is there a rule to calculate engineering fees for public art?
Is there a rule?
Yeah.
Is there a rule? Oh, is there a rule for calculating fees?
Engineering fees
Oh,
specifically.
engineering fees. You know, that's an interesting question because I always have to get an engineer one way or another. And you always include that in your cost, in your budget. I mean, if you're doing public art, you're gonna have to have an engineer to tell you how deep you're gonna dig that hole, or these materials aren't sufficient for this application, or and engineers are funny people. They will not stamp your paper unless you dig the hole a certain way. So yeah, you gotta have you have to have an engineer.
Mhm.
You have to, yeah. And engineering fees, they vary. I mean, on the average, engineering fee will run you $25,000 on the average
For a big project, for
for a
sure.
big project. So I've done where on the average they're 10,000.
Mhm.
I'd say we've seen projects where you're anywhere from couple thousand, 2,000, all the way to exactly what Charles was saying about 25,000. And I think a way to kind of think about where it would fall on that scale is to think about the complexity of what you're proposing.
Right.
If it's a structure that is going into the ground and there's foundations, are there multiple foundations? If it's a complex connection detail, if there are things like wind and things like that, or seismic, or you know, earthquakes that you're going to have to evaluate, think about that as being places where that's going to add on, you know. So if you're attaching something to a pre-engineered wall or a pre-engineered space, maybe your cost for engineering would be less. You know, so I think as you're planning if you're looking at what you're proposing and thinking about every time it goes into the ground, every time it connects to itself, or every time there's another connection detail, those are pieces you're going to have engineered. So, you know, if there's a lot of that in your project, it might drive that cost up higher.
Exactly. Exactly. Because every time you talk to the engineer and we're having counsel like we're having right now, and then before we get off the line, he says, "Where do I send that bill?"
Yep.
Okay. So this person is asking, for projects that would have workshop components and require several of different kinds of tools, should budgets include these items? I often wonder if they could be borrowed from the agency or granting institution. Would these tools be available? Are there tools ever available?
Tools, I mean,
that's a really good question. I mean, I think it just really depends, I suppose. You could have that conversation with the project manager and ask, you know, like if you have like a really specific thing in mind, you want to offer a painting class or something to, you know, grade school students as part of the community engagement. You could just straight up ask the project manager if something like that exists, or, you know, if the agency doesn't have it themselves, maybe they have a partner, or like the school could provide it, you know. So I think there's workarounds, but generally, like our division doesn't have like supplies like that, because every project is so different, and because of that, every community engagement plan is so different. But I think it's always worth asking and trying to leverage kind of what other, you know, community resources exist, or, you know, partners that you could, you know, borrow things or from. I think that's always a good idea.
Sometimes even studio space
Mm-hmm.
too, because you know, you may not have a plasma cutter or something like that. Of course, that could be rental, but you know, usually you want to have a steady flow of certain equipment and things like that. So it's important to have access, but usually the client doesn't have that access or to what you necessarily need to do the work. But I mean, public, but dealing with the public, you have those meetings. You do want to do a workshop with some of the people or the young people in the community to have them be a part of the empowerment of what you're doing. So just basic things to just maybe come to the studio itself and have just a discussion. I did that with the Martin Luther King monument that I did in South Central, where they actually named the monument, the details that are written in the granite, in the bronze plaques. So, but they came to my studio 3 times, and they came to the foundry, and those things. Now those young kids are like 30 or 40 years old, so. I mean, they carry that empowerment with them. So yeah, it's you know, those tools are not always available to artists, but it's good. That's why I ask for other artists to participate in what I'm doing, because they will do the same thing. They may come back to me, or they may develop this tool thing for themselves where they're not alone. That's all. Yeah.
Okay. Someone is asking if you have experience doing smaller projects like community murals, what advice do you have for the transition into larger, more complicated works?
You know, I'm not a painter. So I've done 1 mural in my entire career. And, you know, I don't brag about it. It was a community effort. And I said, yeah, I could do it. But a lot of young people participated and they had fun. That's the best thing I can tell you. Is as
Yeah.
long as community is a part of it, good to go.
I think an advice I would give to someone who's trying to translate their work from maybe smaller things to larger things is participating in things just like this, for one. And I think what Charles has spoken about in many ways is educating, taking time to like learn about materials, learn about things, look for resources, look for support like this, and like the resources that Brianna shared as well. And then as I think talked about in the applying, we did a session on applying to public artwork, and we had a specific section in that where we talked exactly about if you're taking your first step into a different round. So again, I'm going to just plug on that one that we're doing that applying to public artworks workshop again. We're going to do that same one over again in a couple of weeks. And I would really encourage you to attend that session, because we specifically talk about tips and tools for applying for public art at different levels for the first time.
You know, in the beginning too, there were actually programs that served the beginning back in the 90s. There was a program where they wanted inexperienced artists to work with public art, and they had seminars so that they knew how to break down a budget and they knew how to present certain things. So yeah, it's a good tool in unto itself.
Okay. A differentiation was made between artist and industry public artworks. Could you elaborate? Are artists sometimes up against companies for commissions?
Yes, indeed. I recall a project, and I won't name the project, that was community-based, but we had artists, engineers, architects, landscapes come from the East Coast to survey the project and submit budgets, where, since everything was in-house, we couldn't meet those kinds of standards. Everything was there. What happened in that particular project is that what was produced had nothing to do with the community. It was art for art's sake and a huge budget. So the artists that could have participated in that were set aside.
Yeah.
Oh, so that happens quite often. I'm sorry, but they will. Yeah, but I mean that happened. Actually, I can talk about a couple of times where that has happened. And they've come to my studio and said, wanted me to participate, just because I was a community person, and they would even give me a fee just to participate so they could put down paperwork that I participated with their public art project. And that's kind of common practice to an extent. It's not really up and up. No one talks about that, but that occurs too. But the people that have, well, actually, oh my God, I could mention a situation that was a breakdown, but I won't, in regards to a team that won a contract, and was denied the contract because someone on the board said, I don't like you. And had enough power to say, squash that. And they did. That was $1 million project.
Yeah.
Ugly.
We're getting close on time for tonight, and we've got a lot of questions. So I wanted to add also, if we don't get through all of these questions tonight, we do have a second session on budgets where we're going to look. We actually are going to have 2 project managers that work for an artist locally who support budgets then. So if we don't get to your question tonight, I highly recommend coming in and we can look at how we get to the rest of the questions and maybe send responses to the attendees so that we can make sure we get your questions answered. Go ahead, Allie, get it. Let's see if we can fit in a few more.
All right. I've looked at examples of budgets and seen things listed as indirect and direct cost. Could you explain the difference?
Brianna, I'm curious how the county differentiates between direct and indirect costs, and then I'll come back to you, Charles. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm confused by that.
I'm not actually sure. I don't know that I've really come across that, like where there's been, can you give me an example, Emily, of what you're thinking?
Yeah, totally. So I do understand this question, and we have seen agencies ask for a budget that breaks it into direct and indirect costs. That is something that comes from primarily from the construction world. Direct costs are the things that sorry, I want to make sure I say this really correctly, because it doesn't always make sense which one is which.
Yeah, like a direct cost for the project would be the materials to produce the commission. And then an indirect cost is like to keep the lights on in your studio to make the work. Is that sort of what we're talking about?
Exactly. So what is exactly a direct cost is your material, your fabrication, etc. Indirect costs might be rent for a studio. It might be your fees for a project manager, even though that seems direct. So it gets a little confusing sometimes what people mean by direct and indirect. It's very helpful, I think, to ask the person actually for an example of what they would break down into those categories. But typically, it is that what you're saying, Brianna.
Yeah, I mean, that is something that we struggle with a little bit, in that we understand that artists, it's tough to be an artist, and there are a lot of indirect costs that add up to maintain the livelihood of being a working artist.
Mhm.
And so that's where we do understand, with our own projects, things like, what's going to happen when the timeline gets pushed for, a project was slated to take 1 year and now it's suddenly 2.5. And then that means that the artist has not only more direct costs in the term of, like they have to have their insurance policy extended longer, or they have to store the artwork. So that's an extra cost. But then, all of the indirect costs associated with like attending additional meetings, that's your time. So I don't really have necessarily an answer, but it is something that I know within our division we're really cognizant of, and we're trying to think about like maybe there's solutions around, bumping up the artist fee potentially so that it could kind of offset some of these indirect costs. But it's something that we don't ask for. Like it's not something that, we require artists to submit to us. Although it might be helpful for us to, know more and kind of collect that information across the fields. But I'm not sure if that at all answered the question.
No.
But
Yeah. Okay, just for the sake of time, if you're selected, what does the finalization process look like? Is it typical for budgets to shift after the proposal round?
Yeah, it is typical. Yes.
yes, and that's where we, I was talking earlier, and Charles was adding to this too, that there are moments throughout the life cycle of the project where you can make alterations and make shifts.
Right.
Okay, any tips on figuring out how to calculate an artist payment amount? Could you share any standard strategies that you see in the field? If hourly, do you have any tips on how to forecast?
And Brianna, can you answer?
Yeah, I mean, I think it always depends on the project. Maybe if it's like a baby project that it's just you're doing for a day and you do have to calculate an hourly rate. That's a little bit trickier, and I don't know that off the top of my head. I've kind of seen things go around for like what teaching artists might make on an hourly basis. But it all depends then on, the level of like the materiality and the technicality of what you're doing. So I think just trying to do some kind of research informally online and amongst friends, and you can ask, others in the fields for a large scale commission, like at the in public art, a standard is usually 20% for the artist design fee, and it's not broken down by an hourly rate. It's just a
Right.
percentage.
Okay.
I think the question about everything or whatever, let's make that our last question for tonight. And then any questions we haven't gotten to, I think there's only a couple, but we'll grab those and we'll make sure we kind of can get an answer and respond to them. Because I want to give a final moment for our guest presenter and for Brianna to say any final words they want to say.
Okay. So the last question is, are budgets expected to include everything or just major expenses? I find it hard when in the early stages of planning to be able to account for some of the smaller supply costs. Is it worth the time to suss out those smaller costs at this stage of the proposal?
Yes. Yeah, it's very important to be very clear as to what you need to start and end the project. But that comes from some experience about what materials that you're working with. You really got to know, you really have to know how it works. You have to know what the materials, the process, and who to go to and why. I mean, there's a lot that you have to like shuffle through.
Thank you, Charles. Brianna, would you like to add anything?
No, I'd say the same thing. I mean, a thought that came to mind as we were talking about, earlier questions around like transitioning from like a smaller scale project into a larger scale or into just new media, I think it kind of comes back to this point of like, if you don't have the experience that Charles is describing, it's, I think, even more incumbent upon you to do your research, to talk to lots of different fabricators, people, get the best quotes available, but then factor in a contingency. Because if you're really trying to like move into a new terrain and you just don't have the experience working in that material, it's not to say that you shouldn't take that growth moment to try and to do it, but just put more bumpers in place in the terms of like more research, talking to more people, getting lots of estimates, and then factoring in contingency in case, you know, you do something and it doesn't work out to plan, which is, you know, part of being an artist, right? Risk taking,
right.
and, you know, experimentation.
Another thing to be considered is that when you get those prices, you want to make sure that those individual contractors are going to hold to those prices when you asked about that. So you're not saying yes and then you go and then they change it and then you're stuck with something that's not compatible with what you're doing.
Yes, that is so, so important. And if you can get it in writing, that's how you hold them to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they might tell you in person, but say, great, I'm going to follow up in an email. Can you just confirm what you said? And then you have it in writing,
Right.
so that if you go back and no one's like twiddling their thumbs, like, what? I didn't say that. Because this happens actually a lot.
Right, right.
Well, I just want to say thank you again, Charles, for coming and sharing so much of your background, your experience, your work, and offering us some insights into the nitty-gritty side of things, the admin side of things. I know we celebrate you and your work for the aesthetics and the qualities that you bring to it and your skill and your craftsmanship so often, but it is also a feat to have built a career over so many years. And there's many things that you have learned and you have done and you have participated in figuring out that underscores the ability to have such a long-standing career. It's not just the aesthetics and the skill that you bring as a maker and as a creator, but also the skill that you bring to navigating these projects and so I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us about that side of things. And it's been a pleasure to get to know you better and more through this process. And I still think back very, very fondly to the time that my family came to visit me and I took them to Watts Tower and you were there and they proudly took a photo with you, and now I get to sit here and talk to you. And so thank you for that. And thank you, Brianna.
I would love to see that photo.
I'll send it to you. I'll send it to you. Yeah. So thank you again. And if you'd like to say, I'll hand it over to Brianna and then Charles, if you want to say any final words tonight.
Yeah, no final words other than just echoing what Emily said. It's such a pleasure to have you, Charles, here with us and taking us through your experiences. There's nothing more valuable than having an artist talk about, you know, the nuances and from your perspective. We always learn so much from it. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for your insight. It's been very rewarding for me to be a part of the panel, and I look forward to see the results. More public artists out there doing some creative things through your efforts, and congratulations for the program.
As I always say, this is a first iteration. We are doing this whole program again next year. We'll be offering another set of workshops. So please feel free to reach out to us. Let us know if we're not covering topics you'd like to hear about, if there's things we could cover that you don't see in the lineup for this year that you'd like to maybe have us address next year. We're always open to hear your ideas, feedback, questions. Again, we have another workshop tomorrow night. That one is going to be an amazing workshop with the artist April Banks. If you're not familiar with her work, she's an incredible artist. And KDI, a landscape architect firm that works a lot with artists, they're going to be in dialogue about a project they've actually worked on together, and how that design for that project has had so many iterations through the life cycle of working with the stakeholders, the communities, the artist, the county, other stakeholders, and how design really is shaped and formed through collaboration in this field. So please join us again tomorrow night. And then, as Ali was saying earlier, on the 21st, we have agencies from all over the county joining us to talk about how you can find out about public art opportunities beyond the county, and be involved in our Southern California landscape of art. So thank you. And I think that is us for tonight.
Thank you, Allie. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you.
Thank you, Allie. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you, program.
Have a
You're,
great night.
Yes, thank you, County.
yes.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Hey, Emily,
Mhm.
we'll need to stop the recording first.
Thank you.